All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the after show for the Magnus Carlsen Invitational. We had the first day of the playoffs today, and it was quite a good day of chess. We saw Hikaru Nakamura go to battle today against fellow American Fabiano Caruana. These guys are no stranger to each other. No stranger to each other. I think they've played each other something like over 60 rapid and blitz games. And that's not counting all the slower games that they've played. Of course, in the U.S. championships, they've been sort of the top two guys for a very long time. Now they're joined by a few other players like Wesley So and some new ones like Jeffrey Zhang. But yeah, they've been sort of at the top of American chess for a long time and quite close to the top of the world chess in both cases. Hikaru definitely at the top of rapid and blitz, and Fabiano sort of on the heels of Magnus for a little while. So their matches are always fun. People tend to remember that Fabiano did win a playoff against Hikaru in a U.S. championship, but overall in rapid chess, Hikaru has tended to get the better of it. And today he did, even though it was not without some drama. We'll take a look at the games. He did strike first with a first win, but then they actually went to a blitz playoff, and Hikaru had to show his speed and his skill in faster chess to win. Today I'm following the chat as usual. So feel free to ask questions, especially our premium members. I try to cater to you guys as much as possible, and we certainly appreciate your membership. And so right now, let's first of all. What did I want to show you? I wanted to show, well, we see here the bracket. So Hikaru is awaiting the winner of Ding Ren against Magnus tomorrow. We're probably going to see a different Magnus tomorrow. He talked a little bit about his play from yesterday when he did Banter Blitz this morning or this afternoon if you are in Europe. Today on Chess 24. I think he won every game there. And maybe gain some confidence ahead of tomorrow. We'll probably see different openings. He did talk a little bit about having played h5 and said whether you believe him or not is up to you. But he said that they had looked at the move h5, which he played on move 3 as black against Ding Ren yesterday. So I wanted to show you. So today where is my? Sorry, I'm having some slight technical difficulties here. But I did want to show you something funny that happened. Hikaru, during this tournament, a lot of people have noticed that Hikaru is a little bit more expressive than some of the other players. And so on our Twitter here, you can see his reaction. I will show you in just a second here. I am both the producer here and the producer and the content guy. So give me a second. I think this will work now. If you don't see it, let me know. But this is Hikaru's reaction after losing here. As you can see, a lot of expression on his face, and then a big sort of pushing back on the chair. Definitely very upset with what he had done. But to his credit, as much as sometimes he has difficult moments, he is very good at bouncing back and sort of moving past it. And so we're going to go. This is from our Twitter, by the way. There's probably a way to show it with higher definition than what I'm doing here. But I thought this was nonetheless worth showing. Yeah, pretty funny. There was actually a story that David Howell was recounting during his Banter Blitz just a few minutes ago. And if you weren't there, I'll tell you. But he was playing, I think, at the Isle of Man or Gibraltar? I forget. And Hikaru was not playing against him, but he was playing against Aragnan on the board next to him. And when Aragnan sacrificed a piece dubiously, apparently Hikaru just couldn't contain himself and was looking at Aragnan trying to, I guess, elicit a reaction out of him for having played such a poor sacrifice. So he's very demonstrative, but he's someone who's also extremely strong, and I think by some people he's a little bit underestimated. But so let's go through today's games, and today's show may be a little bit quicker just because we have fewer games. but maybe you'll appreciate that. We're also getting started a little bit late because it all, it went to a playoff, and so and after that we had the pleasure of having David Howell play a lot of our premium members. He always does a great job. He's a very generous person, both in his explanation, but also just in what he says. Like, you see a certain kindness that you don't necessarily see all the time. So I enjoy watching him, and I was hosting that show. So, all right. So first game, I actually did want to talk a little bit about the first move. It's E4. I was very surprised to see Fabiano play E4 today. Throughout this tournament, Hikaru seemed to really struggle in the Queen's Gambit decline variation that he keeps playing. And so I was surprised to see Fabiano revert to E4 and play here the Italian, which Hikaru plays this variation a lot too. But to me, it seems like a line that's just quite solid for Black. And so, yeah, so I was surprised by this choice. Of course, Fabiano is incredibly strong and incredibly well prepared. So I'm sure that he had his reasons. But to me, I expected D4. And in fact, that was I got this fantasy chess pick wrong because I had assumed fewer e4s being played than they turned out to be. So this variation of the Italian has been extremely popular. H6 is one of the moves that's been played by pretty much everyone. Carlsen, I think Caruana himself has played it with Black. Pretty much all of the Karyaki and the top theoreticians have played H6. It's also every other sort of logical move from A6, A5, Bishop B6, or castles. Everything is playable here. But there's a surprising amount of theory now in these variations. In this case, Hikaru plays A5. This is sort of a pet variation of his. He's played this a lot. I mean, in fact, if you look at the games in ChessBase right now, you'll see a ton of games from Hikaru himself from this position. So yeah, and it used to be that we would always play A6 with Black, and now White has often tried to expand on the queen side by playing A4 and B4, A5. So now both sides seem to voluntarily play this move, whether it's A4 or A5. So in the first game here, Fabiano plays D4. In the second game, he went for something else. He played Knight BD2. But D4 is certainly playable, like using the fact that Black hasn't retreated to B6 to force them into going into another structure. So after Bishop E3 here, Black doesn't really have a choice but to play, if they don't want to get their pawn structure messed up with D takes E5, they have to play E takes D4. But Hikaru seemed fairly happy to get this position. It seems to be that this isolated queen pawn position is a little bit easier maybe, or a little bit better for White, but it's not much. And so Hikaru gets this position here where it's all about sort of activity versus the bishop pair versus the weak isolated queen pawn. But Black is solid enough. And so here he's in time to play Knight D5. Also, Bishop F5 is a possibility. I'm curious if you would have tried that, maybe if they played this again. But after Knight D5, he gets maybe a slightly worse position as Black, but it looks like it's enough to hold. And Hikaru really doesn't mind getting these positions that are slightly worse if he thinks he's not going to have too many problems holding. And he is really good at defending, especially in rapid. So he plays Bishop F5 before White has time to play Bishop C2 and Queen D3. Knight E5, A4, Bishop C2, takes, Bishop C7. And this is a position where I thought that he might have to defend more than he ultimately did. And I think maybe the next move was a little bit of the culprit. Fabiano played Rook E1. And the thing is, if it's Black to move here, I don't think, like, let's say White makes just to pass the turn here. I don't think Black would take on E5 because pawn takes E5. And now this pawn is weak, and this doesn't seem easy. White has a majority that they can push. It doesn't seem like an easy position for Black to play. However, after he plays Rook E1, now it's conceivable to take, and he did take, and he seemed to mostly solve his problems here. So it's possible that here White should have tried a different move, whether that's Queen F5 or G3, for example, just to kind of pass the turn, let Black figure out what they want to do. If they play Rook E8, then maybe we'll play Queen F5. Because after Rook E1, Bishop E5, Rook E5, Queen D6, it seems like Black has mostly solved their problems. And And indeed, like Hikaru had no problem holding from now on. So he gets to trade at least one pair of rooks. Now Fabiano decides to take this way, which is fine, but I think at this point most of the edge is just gone. Hikaru found a nice maneuver, bring the rook to c4, and now some exchanges. Well, yeah, so this was actually quite nice. He played rook to e4, a nice move. A takes b3, there was nothing really wrong with it, but rook e4 really means that black has no problem at all. This is force. Queen takes here. Now queen takes b3. Of course, white cannot trade because the black pawn will queen, so they have to play something like this. Their queen c5 was possible too, and now they just force a draw. So this was really a pretty good game for Hikaru because he didn't seem to be too troubled by white's opening and managed to draw pretty effectively. So they go into game two. So in game two, Hikaru plays d4, and Fabiano has been playing the Slav. He had a couple of games in the candidates, and Hikaru plays the exchange Slav, and they actually get a really interesting variation of it. The exchange Slav has the reputation of being drawish. It is drawish when white wants it to be, but it doesn't have to be drawish. And if you saw some of my other after shows, I talked about this a little bit, and if not, then you can certainly go back and watch them. But in this particular case, they get a very interesting position where, so we'll just go fast forward a few moves. This has all been played. And in this position, black plays a very interesting move, knight to h5. And this leads to very sharp positions, in fact. But Hikaru seemed not to know the theory maybe quite as well as Fabiano did. And so he played bishop e5, after which black seems to be comfortable. But there are some really fascinating lines starting with bishop g5 here. And so I'll give you a sample. f6, really the only move. I think most of the other ones are just not good. So for example, like bishop e7, I mean, you wouldn't play knight h5 to play bishop e7, but here we would just take and probably play knight e5. This is just going to be a better position for white. So that's not the idea. And then queen moves just don't make too much sense. So black has to play f6, sorry. Now this is where it gets really complicated. So bishop h4 is possible, actually. And it's interesting how black would respond. So now we're definitely threatening this pawn on h7. So black probably plays g5. And then I think there's a lot of analysis with this, but it gets pretty complicated. I think black is okay, though. But the really interesting line, and this was discussed in the broadcast a little bit, is bishop takes h7. And now the position just gets kind of wild. So bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, pawn takes g5. We can also wait maybe to take on c3, but it seems like it makes sense to get rid of it as soon as possible. I can see, so the other move is to take on g5. Then queen g6, the king comes to f8, queen takes h5, and bishop e8. And so this, you can get the same thing, having taken on c3, and I'm not entirely sure if it makes a difference. But this wins the piece back, because if you play queen h3, then the bishop is just pinned in a bad way. So you'll eventually lose that piece, right? So, yeah, so here we play queen g4, rook h7, and then knight takes g5, rook h6, knight e6, rook e6, queen e6. And we just have a very complicated position here with really chances for both sides. I mean, white has two pawns. Sorry, what is that? It's actually three pawns for 3 pawns plus the piece against 2 pieces for a rook. So it's a wild position, and it's hard to assess. But black is not without chances, but it seems like if I had to pick, especially in a rapid game, I'd be happy to be white. So, but Hikaru, of course, I'm sure Fabiano was well prepared here. Fabiano goes for bishop. Hikaru goes for bishop e5, which is certainly a much more tame variation. Just making sure I didn't miss anything here. Okay, so f6, bishop g3, knight takes g3, pawn takes g3, knight c4, and now I think black can be reasonably happy with the outcome of the opening. nothing special, but certainly a successful like hold, so to speak. But here something did go slightly wrong for black. I think maybe instead of rook c8, maybe king f7 defending this would have been a little bit better, because white does get a slightly more pleasant position in the next few moves. I will show you. So here, so maybe something here, not letting white play a5 without being able to trade queens, because if you can trade queens, it's one thing, but here after a5, it starts to be a little worse, because this position is basically very, very passive for black, and white's king is a little bit safer. They have an extra pawn on that side of the board. It just gets unpleasant. However, Fabiano managed to hold this one, and in fact, I think it was a blunder. I'm not totally sure, but I'll show you here. Sorry, they play a little bit of a cat and mouse game. I don't know. The computer likes white a lot. I don't think it's easy for white to make progress. Eventually, he finally decides to play f3 to play e4, but it's not easy for white to make progress. Yeah, and here after knight c4, he could play a number of moves that keep things together here, but he decides to go for this, and after knight a3, queen b3, I mean, maybe he just decided that this was fine, but it certainly doesn't look like a winning attempt. It's more like it seems like white can still hold, but there was not really a reason in my mind to sacrifice the exchange, because after h4, the only side that can be better, I think, is black and not white. So but he does manage to hold here without any problems. He's attacking the rook here and has a bunch of checks, and so they drew in this way. So game 2 is a draw. So pretty tight start to the match, and yeah. So next we have Fabiano trying again to play e4, e5, and they go into the same variation. So Fabiano must have thought that he had chances for an advantage in this line, or at least that it was a very playable position. But in this case, so after a5, last game he played d4. Today he played knight bd2, which is a bit more common. And now Hikaru plays an interesting plan in this position, and this bishop a4 is sort of typical. It's a bit like going back into a Spanish kind of position, where sometimes you might want to take on c6 and then play d4. And Hikaru plays an interesting plan, knight d7. There's another move which is sort of typical that I wanted to show because it's also possible, queen b8, which is actually one of the sort of typical ideas after playing a5. You bring the queen to a7, and we see ideas like that. If you play the white pieces of the Philidor, you might be familiar, like you have a bishop on c4 and a pawn on a4, and sometimes we play queen b1, queen a2. You may have seen this before. So this is a similar concept, and it's an interesting move, putting pressure on the f2 pawn. But Hikaru plays knight d7, a very concrete plan. After knight f1, normal move, f5. And so this sort of forces this structure, which I think is interesting. I mean, I thought white might be slightly better in this game, but Hikaru did play well. And let's fast forward a few moves. There's a critical moment in this position. In this position, Fabiano plays bishop f5. So basically, it seems to me like white's advantage has maybe dissipated here. And after bishop f5, Hikaru plays bishop g8. It was probably time here to say, okay, I have not achieved anything here. Let's play bishop e6 and try to repeat moves. And I think I don't think black has they don't want to trade this bishop, because after that, the light squares around the king are really weak. So really, there's not a better way to play for white. But Fabiano may be thinking, I don't want to. Next game, I'm going to be black. It's going to be 1.5 to 1.5. Even if I draw, I have to go and play blitz against Hikaru, where Hikaru is probably a much bigger favorite in blitz than he is in rapid. And so he may have just said, you know what, I'll take my chances with white. But here, his position sort of went downhill quickly, and Hikaru played this part extremely well. pretty much perfect move after perfect move here from black. So he's putting pressure on d4, and this position actually collapses for white in just a few moves. Here it seems like, you know, the best move was actually to play rook d1, admitting that you're just losing a pawn. But this is already, you know, this 4 against 2 on the queen side just seems to be really, really bad. So already a tough position, but he plays rook e4, and then after queen f6, he really has no moves that that keep the position together, I should say. Like black's pieces are just amazingly well placed, and he's got this idea of playing rook a5, which comes next, and it's just really hard. So he played rook g4, rook a5. There is really no good defense here. Bishop g6, bishop e6. So very precise. He doesn't take on f2. He plays bishop e6 first. And the difference is that here, white can't even play rook e4 because they'll lose their bishop. So really precise play from Hikaru. Now he's taking an important central pawn, and it's not just one pawn. Everything else is falling too. Now he takes one more pawn. In the broadcast, they were saying that Hikaru maybe should have done this and that it's easier, but it's very hard to criticize him. In fact, the computer says that his move is better. So yeah, Hikaru really played with razor-like precision from this point on. He's won 3 pawns now, and I mean, this of course is game over in a lot of different ways, but it ends with this rook f6 hitting both of these pieces. On knight f7, by the way, we can even take it and play bishop g8. So there's really nothing here. You could also play king g8. But yeah, so impressive game from Hikaru, actually, who managed to make it look more or less effortless in this game. And yeah, I'm surprised that Fabiano went for this variation in the opening twice, because it just seems like a tough one. Unless you really got something that I haven't seen in the theory, it's not easy to get an edge. And you don't have much time to come up with creative, you know, ways to play. So now Hikaru just needs a draw, but Fabiano comes up with the win. So Fabiano goes for a King's Indian setup. This bishop f5 idea is sort of a way to get out of the main theory. But Hikaru does get a very reasonable position. This looks like a normal King's Indian. I guess the bishop being on d7 is the only difference, and it's not clear who that really. It should be better for black than having it on c8, I guess. But it's not entirely clear either. So I'm not sure that I love this c6 idea. I thought that maybe he could try to just play knight e8, castles, and f5. To me, that's especially with the match circumstance, that's a more aggressive way to play. Because after c6, castles knight e8, white has a chance to play d takes c6, and this is a common plan in this bishop e2, bishop e3. I think this variation is called the Gligorich variation of the King's Indian. And this pawn structure, it leads to a very different kind of game where it's not like black is much worse or anything like that. However, it's much harder to get an attack. The position is so open that you can't just close everything up on the queen side and try to break through. So they play some normal moves here that are very typical of this variation. I'm not sure I liked rook c1. Actually, it seems like this rook might wait to go there. I remember some games of, you know, Grandmaster Yuri Shulman, for example, in the US was a big proponent of this variation, and I feel like often the rook would come to d1, and so maybe queen b3 or queen a4. The computer likes these moves, and here, you know, you can still play this and not be too worried about this exchange. I think white is just better here. So maybe queen a4 with rook fd1. Rook c1 looked to be a little bit tame, although Hikaru got a still very pleasant position here. So he played b5, which is one of the, you can try to either break with c5 or b5, but c5 here, black is very well positioned to meet it with d5, and it's not clear, you know, again, this is the kind of opening of the position that you want to be very careful about. But so Hikaru plays b5, and then the idea is that you try to take control of the d5 square, c5. After that, I think black is much worse. I mean, this move, I think if it was a slow game, he might have played this. I still think, though, that white has a very, very pleasant position here. It's fairly easy to play, and it's hard for black to get an attack. So already the position is difficult. So b5, bishop d3. So Hikaru plays this part well. Knight d5, I think, was good. He could try to play maybe a4 first, but okay, there's nothing wrong with this move. Now he has a beautiful c6 square, and then he's got a simple plan of pushing on the queen side. So now, positionally, black, if you let white make 5-6 moves, it's just going to be horrible. But black starts the attack, and this is very much like the King's Indian in general. So it becomes a little bit of a race. But I did want to show, so here, I think maybe Hikaru could have played a little bit differently. Well, this was actually okay. Bishop e2 made sense, and now I think he's threatening to play bishop f6 and pawn takes g4, which you get rid of a good bishop, but black has essentially no attack at all, and you still have a monster sitting on c6. So after bishop g6, he plays queen e1. That I think is a good move. Knight h7, a4. A4 was fine. Knight g5. Yeah, and here I think the move that he made was just a sign, sort of being a little bit under pressure in this game. Because I think if he's got time, he would just play bishop g5, pawn takes, and then, for example, rook c4. And now I think this is just a tough position. For example, so we just want to take on g4, and then everything is locked up, right? Like you could basically never lose because you'll play your bishop to f3 if needed, queen e2, rook b1, and then you start hopefully crashing through on the queen side. There's really not much counterplay here. So yeah, and this position, I mean, I think is essentially just lost for black. He can play pawn takes f3, bishop f3. But now, again, there's zero chance for attack, and this bishop on g7 is never going to be a good piece. You can bring it to d8, but that's not going to be that great after we play a5. And now white will simply play queen e2. They'll have the idea in h3, for example, and white's position is rock solid, so Hikaru would never lose this. So queen f1 that he played instead of taking on g5, just a bit of a mistake. Now after bishop f6, already he's got to figure out what he wants to do. Here he already makes a mistake. It's possible. I wonder if he could still play bishop takes g5, pawn takes g5. It's not quite as clear here because now if we play rook c4 the same way, now g3, it's a little bit less clear. I still think this is probably what he should do, and I don't think he's going to get checkmated here. He'll have time to play queen e1, bishop f1. And, at some point, black will play g4, sacrifice something, but probably be able to hold. So maybe this was possible. After a5, he might have just missed this because I don't know why he would go into it otherwise. So suddenly now black is better. Still not over because, if you don't checkmate, then the b pawn will eventually be strong. And now they both were a little bit short on time, so we're not going to go through everything in huge detail. But it continues to be messy, and here Fabiano finds a great plan. And Fabiano played this next part. He really played extremely well, and so this is instructive how black sort of wins this game because they still have to make progress, right? The rook is tied to defending this. So he plays queen g6, queen d3, defending the pawn on e4. Now h5. So he wants to play h4, and so. If you let black play h4, you can see things going badly very quickly. So Hikaru plays h4, and now Fabiano had prepared to play bishop takes h4. Very, very strong. Pawn takes, queen f6. He's trying to take queen takes h4, king g1, queen h4, queen d2. And so now you still have to win this position. Of course, it should be winning, but you have to finish it off. So he plays king g6. The idea is that this frees the queen to move because there won't be any queen g5 check. And in some cases, he also might even be able to try to trade queens. So knight c4, queen f6. And so he's playing just very calmly. Now he's threatening rook takes b7. So the knight goes back. queen h4, the knight goes back, queen f6. Hikaru went here. By the way, obviously, I don't think that Fabiano would have made a draw here. He can win by playing g3, and surely that was his idea. He just decided to repeat a couple of times first. In fact, this seems to be just completely winning for black, sorry. So Hikaru tries knight e3, queen f4, and we see how dominant these pawns on the king side are. There's really no defense here. He makes some moves, but Fabiano is precise. Takes the last pawn. Well, not the last pawn. I guess they still have one. But now he's got 5 pawns for the piece. It's really starting to be a lot of pawns. Knight g2, queen d4, and there is just nothing here. So, pretty strong finish from Fabiano. And you can see why Hikaru was very upset about this game, because he did have a very nice King's Indian position earlier on. So we go into a blitz tiebreak. By the way, the rules for the playoffs are a little bit different. Instead of playing an Armageddon right away, they play a 2-game blitz match, and the 2-game blitz match is precedes. And if there's a winner from the first match, then there's just one blitz match. So they're playing 2 games. So in the first game, Fabiano goes for the same variation. So he's stuck to his guns today. Again, I would have expected him maybe to play d4 in the blitz game, just try to grind out that queen's gambit decline line. But Hikaru, and one thing about Hikaru with black is it seems like when he believes in something, he just keeps playing it, and this is the case here. But he does do a very good job in this game as well. They do get an unbalanced position, but I think black is not worse here. And Hikaru, I think, has had positions like this in the past. So I think around here, yeah. So I think e5 was probably the start of something wrong for white here. It doesn't look like d takes e4 is something you're necessarily afraid of. And so it's possible, like, okay, of course with the computer it's easy, but the computer likes bishop d2, and that does seem to be a pretty interesting move. The idea is, right now we're kind of threatening to play bishop b4, and if the rook is on f7, then look at this queen with an eye on this knight. So so this is a threat of bishop b4, and it looks like black can make a move though. So and by the way, if you play this, then I think white is very happy, right? This is a position where okay, it's not winning for white, but the bishop on b6 is not very well placed, and the weakness on e6 seems worse than the weakness of d4. So this seems pleasant for white. So instead of d takes e4, maybe queen f7 is a reasonable move. But now you play bishop b4. The rook is forced to leave this file, and then white can try to improve, maybe like this, maybe even rook e3 with rook e1. It seems to me like there are ways for white to try to play this position. But instead he played e5, and then after knight d7, it seems like his center is kind of weak. He has to play knight d2 because most likely rook takes f3. Sorry, rook takes f3 looks like some kind of a threat with knight h4. So he plays knight d2, bishop a5, and now Hikaru's play is very natural. He cracks open the center, takes the e-pawn, and this is already I think a difficult position for white to hold, and especially difficult to hold in this time control. This pawn structure is already messed up. These 2 pawns are both weak, and black has 2 center pawns, including a d pawn that's passed. But this wasn't the end, and I'm going to go kind of quickly because this is a blitz game. But Hikaru's position sort of improves to be extremely good here. And he makes this move d4, and he himself was extremely upset after the game, because I think he missed that the bishop just comes back to d2 and attacks the rook rather than play bishop h6 when he would have a move here, I think knight f8, and he's just winning. So I think he just messed that up, maybe played too quickly, because if he just played, for example, knight f8 first or queen f7 first, and maybe follow it up with e4, his position is just amazingly good. But I think here, after bishop d2, suddenly it's actually not clear who is better, because even though black has won a pawn, the knight is incredibly well placed on e4. The bishop suddenly is kind of a dud on f6. The king is a little bit weak. Suddenly it's not totally clear. Maybe black is still better, but it's not clear. So here they make a few moves. Rook b1, strong move. He's trying to infiltrate either via b7 or b8. Rook a7, queen d3. It's clear already that the momentum is shifted, right? Like white has all this play. Bishop e7, queen f3, queen f7, queen g3. It's already like holding just by a thread for black. Rook e8, king h7. Yeah, so here, well here, you know, again, they have quite little time here. So queen f3 is a strong move the computer points out. But I did want to show a few moves later. So in this position, there, you know, after queen g6, there starts to be all these tricks. So for example, knight f6 is playable here. Knight takes f6, rook h8. So we're winning the queen. This position is not clear though, and it seems like black might just be okay. They were looking in the broadcast, I think, at rook a2, which seems like a reasonable move. And it doesn't look like white has anything more than maybe a draw here. But already, you know, they're close. So Fabiano plays rook c8. And so he's threatening to play rook takes c6. So if black plays like just a waiting move just to show you, there's rook c6, queen c6, and knight f6 with a very standard mate. So Hikaru sees that, and he makes pretty much the, you know, the most natural defensive move. He covers the h7 square. So now it's not going to be mate. And somehow Fabiano very quickly responded rook takes c6, which just basically gave up the game here, unfortunately. And so the thing is that if he played f3 here, or a simple, you know, simple kind of holding move, this is still a tough position for black. Black is probably in some trouble still. And so he was better. So and yeah, you're someone in the chat is talking about the reaction of Hikaru. Yeah, I mean his reaction was Hikaru is probably the most expressive chess player on the planet. Certainly the most expressive player in this tournament. So yeah, he doesn't hide how he feels, even on the webcam here. So yeah, someone asked, did he pre-move? No, I mean I don't think he could pre-move, because you know that there's a defense, so it doesn't really make sense to pre-move. So yeah, I don't quite know. You know, maybe he missed that knight f8 was a possible defense and then just didn't spend the time to figure it out. But in any case, it was sort of really too bad for the game to end like this. There's nothing here, just down a rook. They played a couple moves, and that was it. So Fabiano, again, in a must-win situation with black. And again, he actually got some chances. So let's see what happens. But it is hard to beat Hikaru in blitz games, I gotta say. Hikaru plays a fairly tame variation here, clearly needing to draw. And even though he gets a quite a normal, very solid position here, I was actually a little bit surprised here that he played d takes e5. You know, I think if the game situation was any different, he would probably play d5. But he played d, knight d5, which is sort of, I mean, I think this is still a better position for white, but I preferred, you know, to keep things a little more locked up. Yeah, and here this bishop b5 just was not, this plan was not that great. He still was doing well here. For example, like, actually, even after this move, if he played, I think just here, bishop c6 was just a mistake. And after that, Hikaru was in some trouble. It seems like he could have made a move like rook d1. The idea is to meet c6 with d6, which is just good for white. And he still has a very, you know, very playable, very reasonable position for white. But bishop c6 was just not a great move, because after knight takes, pawn takes, bishop a6, suddenly it's not clear that this c6 pawn is strong, right? Like if you could bring the knight to d5 in a few moves, then you'd be doing well, but you can't, and so it's not that trivial. So he plays a4, rook e8. Hikaru clearly trying to you know, take the life out of the position, which is reasonable given the score. But here after rook d6, he's actually in some trouble. So it's instead of, I guess, trading that pair of rooks was a little bit of a mistake. He could just keep the position. Maybe play bishop a3 is another idea. Queen e6, and then can you play b4 here? I was wondering about that. No, b4 there's bishop c4, so you have to be careful here. But maybe, I mean, again, I think if he does something very patient. I'm not sure that black has any plans. And right now they can't play rook d6 with the bishop on a3. So, but in the game, after that rook trade and rook d6, suddenly it's not easy because black has a simple plan of trying to encircle that pawn, and it's not so trivial. So they get this position, which again is okay, but black is starting to have chances. But Hikaru, in Blitz, he's so good at holding everything together. And here, again, he did. I mean, they got into an endgame, and this endgame is actually reasonably good for white. And I did want to show you, though, it gets interesting in a few moves. But the funny thing is, it's actually mostly interesting for white and not for black. So he plays a5 because otherwise black has to deal with a5 followed by a6 or a5 followed by ab. So he plays a5, and in this position, it's interesting that white is actually completely winning, and I thought this is worth showing here. If white plays king to g2, there's actually nothing for black to do here. They have to eventually take. So you can play h5, bishop f2, for example. Eventually, black is going to have to take because they can't play king f4, bishop g3. Bishop takes d6. So eventually, they have to take on f3, and the position is just losing. They can't do anything. And eventually, white will play into a king and pawn endgame. And once the bishops are traded, this is one of these positions where white, it's almost like they have a protected passed pawn. The threat of playing d6, if we take these bishops off, the threat of playing d6 is so strong that black can't do anything with their king coming to d4 because we'll play d6 and we're way too fast. So this position is just winning for white. For example, pawn takes, king g5, let's say bishop g3. You have to take. Now d6 is a threat. So we go here, king h4, and you can't go king g6, defend the pawn, because we'll play d6. And then when you go this way, d6 is just way too fast, and white just wins. So it's pretty, I thought this was interesting. Hikaru plays f4, and the funny thing is there's another position where he's winning, which is, it doesn't matter, because he just needed to draw this game, and I think he himself had in his mind, I just got to draw, so he didn't look for anything better. But in this position, let's fast forward a couple moves. So of course, we are happy to repeat. So here, this is actually a sort of an interesting position. After bishop f4, king f4, he has one move that wins here. So in the game, he played d6, which is actually sort of risky because he had to see that his king doesn't get checkmated. And he was absolutely right. But the funny thing is, if he played king h3, he's actually winning. Sort of the same idea as before. Now, but there's a difference. So first of all, if black plays e3, the idea is that you play king g2, and on e2 you play king f2, and so of course you're in time, and otherwise you'll play d6 next. So that's the first idea. But what if black does the same thing as in the game and plays king f3? So now you can't stop it from queening. So white plays d6, e3, dc, e2, c8. The difference is that e1 is not check. And so here it's just a trivial win for white. You just give a check here. The king goes somewhere. We check him on this file in order to be able to trade queens. The queens get off the board and the game is over. So he actually still had a win here, which is, it's not about the result, but more just about the chess, and that it was an interesting king h3 instructive. You do have this theme in these pawn endings that if you can win a tempo to avoid the queen coming on the board with check, as happened in the game. And in the game here, I mean, I guess he's very, very, very fast. I mean, faster than anyone at calculating this stuff. He had calculated that he has king h5, and he's actually still winning because his king just escapes. So this is just a couple checks, and the c pawn is very strong. So Fabiano gives some checks, but as long as Hikaru doesn't blunder his queen, of course he can't lose this game. Ultimately, he actually won it. It doesn't really matter because he was happy with the draw, of course, as well. But so I think a pretty strong match from Hikaru, except for having lost that game. The fourth game of the Rapid, he had a really strong performance, and so he should go into the final with confidence. We'll see tomorrow whether he ends up playing against. I'm going to go back to my other shot here. We'll see whether he ends up playing against Ding Liren or against Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen himself said that he doesn't know how much of a favorite he is in that match. I think, that doesn't mean he doesn't think he's a favorite, but he certainly respects Ding Liren. And we will see how that match goes. Of course, we're all curious to see what openings Magnus comes up with tomorrow. Is he going to come with solid openings like playing e4, e5, or is he going to come with some more off the beaten track stuff like e4, knight c6 that he seems to like to do in Blitz and Rapid? So we'll see who shows up, and it should be fascinating. I'll be there with an after show tomorrow as well. Thanks for tuning in today, and I will leave you with a word from our Chessable sponsors, and also thank you to Millennium, who have made contributions to this after show. Thank you very much, and I will see you guys tomorrow.